Welcome to Into the Margins, where we dive into the margins to find what makes businesses profitable in order to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
And today, we are looking at why a perfectly optimized marketing campaign is, well, it's actually the fastest way to bankrupt your company if you aren't looking at the right dashboard.
Oh, 100%.
We are dissecting the ocean of data that founders drown in every single day. And more importantly, we're going to figure out how to stop tracking the volume of the crowd and start tracking the actual value of the customer.
It's a really phenomenal premise for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because there is this deeply ingrained historical fallacy in, modern business culture that equates motion with progress. We see it constantly.
Yeah, motion is not progress.
Right. You log into a software platform, you see a dashboard glowing with green arrows pointing up, and the immediate psychological response is just this massive dopamine hit.
You feel like you're crushing it.
Exactly. You think you are crushing it.
Yeah.
But those green arrows, they're often tracking vanity metrics. They measure activity, not profitability. I mean, if we look back at the late 90s, right during the absolute height of the dot-com bubble, you had companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars based almost entirely on what they called eyeballs.
Eyeballs. Wow. Yeah. The ultimate vanity metric. Just this idea that if you simply aggregate enough human attention, the monetization will just magically figure itself out.
Precisely. And the underlying thought process of that era was just fundamentally flawed. It assumed that a user looking at a web page had intrinsic financial value.
Which they don't.
No, they don't. And we all know how that ended. I mean, with spectacular fiery bankruptcies like Pets.com, where they optimized for reach but had entirely negative unit economics.
Right. They were losing money on every bag of dog food they shipped.
Exactly. And you'd think we learned, but fast forward to the early 2010s startup culture, and we saw a similar obsession with pure user acquisition over actual conversions. People were tracking the completely wrong metrics. They were scaling their losses, assuming that eventually, somehow, scale would create margin.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core concept we need to establish right at the top for you listening is that analytics shouldn't just be numbers on a screen that you ignore until your accountant calls you in a panic.
Yeah, please don't do that.
Analytics must act as the telemetry for your business. I mean, think about it. If you are flying a commercial airliner, you wouldn't just look at the engine RPM and guess whether you were heading toward New York or Los Angeles.
Right.
You need a system telling you your altitude, your trajectory, your fuel burn rate, the incoming weather. If you are only looking at the RPM, which in this metaphor is your website traffic, you might be running the engines perfectly, but you could still fly the plane straight into a mountain.
That telemetry analogy is far more accurate than just calling it a GPS, because telemetry requires interpreting multiple data streams simultaneously, right, to understand the health of the entire system.
Yeah, it's holistic.
Exactly. The goal of this deep dive is to help you separate those vanity metrics from key performance indicators, or KPIs, because a KPI actually helps you identify behavioral trends, it helps you optimize your capital allocation, and maximize your return on investment. It's the difference between looking busy and actually building equity.
Right. And before we can even begin to look at the bottom line, how much cash is actually sitting in the bank, we have to look at the first point of contact, the interaction layer.
The front door.
Yeah, the front door. In the past, people called this the digital storefront, but I think that implies a physical limitation that just doesn't exist online. Let's talk about the absolute foundation of digital telemetry, which is website traffic and engagement.
All right.
So page views, they're simply the total volume of server requests. Someone's browser asked your server for information and your server delivered it. But the critical question that traps so many founders is this. Is a higher volume of server requests always a leading indicator of financial success?
Absolutely not. And this is where the nuance of data interpretation really begins. If page views represent the raw volume of interaction, we have to immediately filter that volume through the lens of the bounce rate.
The dreaded bounce rate.
Right. In digital architecture, a bounce is a session that triggers only a single request to the analytics server. So a user arrives on a page, does not trigger any other secondary actions, and leaves. They open the door, take one look around, and walk away.
So if I'm looking at my analytics dashboard and I see a massive spike in page views, but my bounce rate is sitting at, say, 90%, my first instinct shouldn't be a celebration. It should be a full-blown audit.
Oh, 100%. Call the team.
Because a high bounce rate signifies a massive disconnect. Let's look at the root causes of that disconnect. Like if I click an ad for a very specific software solution and the link dumps me onto a generic homepage where I have to hunt for the feature I actually wanted, I'm gone.
You're bouncing.
I'm bouncing immediately. That is a total failure of content relevance.
Content relevance is the primary psychological driver of a bounce. You broke the promise of the click. But there is an even more insidious technical driver, and that is latency, load times.
Oh, yeah. The silent killer.
Years ago, Amazon conducted this sweeping internal study on latency and revenue. And they discovered that for every 100 milliseconds of latency,
Wait, 100 milliseconds?
just a tenth of a second delay in page load time, for every tenth of a second, they lost 1% in total sales.
A tenth of a second. That is barely the blink of an eye. I mean, how does a user even perceive that?
It is the blink of an eye physically, but psychologically, it is an absolute eternity in the modern digital ecosystem. When a user clicks a link, they're experiencing this microburst of anticipation.
Right, they want the answer now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If the mobile processor has to struggle to render uncompressed, massive image files, or if the server response time is lagging, that anticipation immediately sours into frustration. The trust is broken before the page even fully loads.
Wow.
If your mobile site takes 4 seconds to load today, the user hasn't just bounced. They have actively categorized your brand as incompetent. They are back on whatever social media feed they came from.
But wait, I have to challenge the idea that a high bounce rate is universally toxic because intent matters, right?
Sure.
Let's say I run a consulting firm and I write a highly technical blog post about the new tax code changes for freelancers.
Okay.
Someone Googles a very specific question, they click my link, my article pops up, and the very first paragraph gives them the exact precise answer they needed.
Okay, I see where you're going.
They read it, they are perfectly satisfied, and they close the tab. They didn't click to another page, so structurally, in the analytics, that is a bounce. But I provided immense value. So how can we say a high bounce rate is always a failure?
You are hitting on the exact difference between intent to learn and intent to buy. And you are completely correct. If they get the answer and leave, it's a structural bounce. This is exactly why looking at a single metric in isolation is so incredibly dangerous.
You need the context.
Right. To understand that specific user interaction, you must pair bounce rate with average session duration. This metric measures the time delta between the first server request and the last recorded interaction.
So if the bounce rate is 90%, but the average session duration is, say, 4 minutes.
Then you don't have a technical failure. You have a highly engaged audience consuming long-form content. You fulfilled their intent to learn. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, average session duration on informational content is really a proxy for brand authority.
Because they're sticking around.
Exactly. The longer they stay, the more they consume your expertise, the more psychological equity you build with that specific user. When their intent eventually shifts from learning to buying, your brand is the one positioned as the authority. So a blog post with a 70% bounce rate and a 3-minute session duration, that is a massive win. You generally want to aim for under 50% on blogs, but high duration mitigates a high bounce rate.
Okay, but if your main e-commerce checkout page or your primary lead capture landing page has a 70% bounce rate,
Then you have an existential crisis.
yeah, fire alarms are ringing.
Because the intent of a checkout page is action. If they are bouncing there, the friction is too high, the pricing is confusing, or the trust is just gone.
So the numbers alone are just raw data. The context of user intent is what actually translates that data into actionable telemetry.
Precisely.
But let's move upstream for a second. Because a beautifully designed, lightning-fast site with incredibly high session duration means absolutely nothing if it exists in a total vacuum. If we are talking about telemetry, we have to look at how these users are actually finding the site in the first place.
This journey to the storefront.
Right. Which brings us to the mechanics of search engine optimization, or SEO.
The realm of organic traffic. And I think it's crucial to clarify right away that organic traffic is never truly free. You aren't paying a direct cost per click like you do with an advertising network, but you are paying heavily in capital expenditure. Your time, your content production, your technical architecture.
Sweat equity.
Yes, massive sweat equity.
And the foundational metric here is the search impression. Now, a lot of founders look at impressions and think it's just another vanity metric. An impression simply means your link appeared somewhere in the search results when a user typed a query. They didn't click it, they just scrolled past it.
Right.
But to me, tracking impression growth is actually tracking the algorithmic perception of your brand.
That is the exact way to look at it. Search impressions are the ultimate leading indicator for visibility. You shouldn't fixate on the raw number because every industry has a drastically different total addressable market. I mean, selling custom enterprise software will have far fewer impressions than, selling athletic socks.
Sure, the search volume is totally different.
Exactly. The target metric here is consistent month-over-month growth. If your impressions are growing 5% every month, it means Google's algorithm is increasingly viewing your domain as a relevant authority and serving it to more users.
But an impression is basically just a billboard on a dark highway.
That's a good way to put it.
It doesn't mean anyone is pulling over. To get them to actually visit, we have to talk about the click-through rate, or CTR. A lot of people call this curb appeal, but I think a better analogy is the headline of a tabloid magazine.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. Because it does not matter how brilliant the journalism is inside the magazine. If the headline doesn't provoke an immediate visceral reaction, no one buys it off the shelf. Your CTR is the percentage of people who see your link and feel compelled to click. And if your impressions are soaring but your CTR is flatlining, you have a massive packaging problem.
And what dictates that packaging? Two things: your meta title and your keyword rankings. Where exactly does your business rank for specific, highly relevant terms? If you rank on page 4 of Google for the phrase, best CRM for small business, your impressions might technically be high if the search volume is massive, but your CTR will be mathematically indistinguishable from 0.
Yeah, because nobody goes to page 4.
User behavior dictates that nobody clicks through to page 4.
Right, there's that old joke, if you want to hide a dead body, put it on page 2 of Google. But the deeper algorithmic reality here is that Google actually uses your CTR to adjust your rankings. It's a feedback loop. If you rank number 4, but your headline is so compelling that you get a higher CTR than the result in the number 2 spot, Google's algorithm notes that behavioral preference and will eventually promote you.
Yes, and this is where we really have to introduce the concept of the conversion funnel. Because let's assume you've mastered the algorithm, you have high impressions, you have a phenomenal CTR, your site loads in 50 milliseconds, and your session duration is high. You have a massive stream of traffic pouring in.
The dream scenario.
The dream. But traffic is just attention. We have to convert attention into equity. In the past, people called this the leaky bucket, where traffic pours in the top and revenue drips out the bottom. But I find that metaphor way too passive. It implies the loss of users is just an accident of physics.
I completely agree. It's not a leaky bucket. I look at it as a series of highly specific psychological toll booths. Every time you ask a user to take a step deeper into your ecosystem, you are asking them to pay a toll. And the currency they are paying with is trust.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The toll booth. So let's look at the first major toll booth, the lead conversion rate. This is the exact moment an anonymous visitor is asked to cross a psychological threshold and hand over their personal data, usually an email address.
Right.
They sign up for a newsletter. They download a white paper. They request a demo. They transition from an aggregated data point to a specific identifiable lead.
And the friction at this toll booth is relatively low. People are protective of their inboxes, sure, but handing over an email address is largely a low-stakes transaction. If the perceived value of your white paper is high enough, they will pay the toll.
But the next toll booth is where the absolute carnage happens.
Oh, yeah.
The customer conversion rate. The percentage of those leads who are actually willing to pull out their physical wallet, enter 16 digits into a form, and transfer capital to your bank account.
The chasm between an email address and a credit card is, it's the single most difficult terrain to cross in all of business. When someone gives you their email, they are casually curious, they are window shopping. When they give you their credit card, they are demanding a definitive solution to a painful problem.
Exactly. The stakes change completely.
So if I'm auditing my funnel and I see a massive gap between the lead and the customer, say I'm converting traffic to leads at 20%, which is incredible, but my lead to customer conversion rate is 0.1%, that terrifies me.
As it should.
I've got a CRM bloated with thousands of emails, but no one is actually buying. To me, that doesn't signify a traffic problem or a marketing problem. That signifies a fundamental product-market mismatch or a massive pricing disconnect. If I just pour more money into Facebook ads to fix the traffic, I'm just accelerating the rate at which people tell me no.
Exactly. And you must use the telemetry to diagnose why they are saying no. Is the checkout interface clunky? Did your free content overpromise and your paid product's landing page underdeliver? Does the pricing model require an annual commitment when the market standard is monthly? The data highlights the specific point of friction so you can deploy your problem-solving capital efficiently.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, where the stakes get incredibly high. We've talked about traffic, we've talked about leads, we've talked about the psychology of the funnel, but let's transition from the marketing architecture to the raw financial realities.
The numbers that keep you up at night.
Let's talk about the actual dollars and cents that dictate whether your company survives the next quarter.
We are pivoting from the mechanics of acquisition to the economics of sustainability.
And in the modern startup ecosystem, the absolute holy grail of those economics is the relationship between two specific metrics: customer acquisition cost, or CAC, and customer lifetime value, or CLV. If you are building a business today, you are essentially told to worship these two numbers.
You are. It's a religion.
So let's define them for everyone. CAC is your total marketing and sales expenditure over a given period, divided by the number of net new customers acquired in that same window. So if I spend $10,000 on a multi-channel ad campaign and I acquire 100 new customers, my CAC is $100.
Simple arithmetic. And CLV, the customer lifetime value, is the total gross revenue a single customer is projected to generate over the entire duration of their relationship with your business. If you are a SaaS company charging $50 a month and your historical churn data shows that an average customer stays for 20 months, your expected CLV is $1,000.
Now, in the prevailing literature of venture capital and modern growth marketing, there is a universally touted benchmark known as the golden ratio. This is presented as the ultimate metric for capital efficiency and startup health.
Yep, here we go.
The rule states that your customer lifetime value should be at least 3 times higher than your customer acquisition cost, the 3-to-1 ratio. So if you spend $100 to acquire a user, they need to generate at least $300 in lifetime value.
Right.
If you hit that 3-to-1 ratio, the prevailing wisdom is that you have achieved product market fit, you have a machine that prints money, and your only job is to raise as much debt or equity as possible and pour it into your acquisition channels to scale aggressively.
And this is where I have to step in and push back aggressively, because that specific narrative is arguably the most dangerous piece of financial advice currently circulating in the startup ecosystem.
Wait, why? A 3-to-1 return on acquisition is the gold standard. If I have a machine where I insert $1 and $3 comes out, I should do nothing else but find more dollars to feed the machine. That is how you capture market share.
You are completely ignoring the reality of operational leverage. You are looking exclusively at gross margin and completely ignoring net margin. This is the exact Silicon Valley marketing myopia that drives fundamentally flawed companies straight off a cliff.
But if your CLV to CAC ratio is healthy, the margin growth takes care of itself at scale.
It absolutely does not.
Well, no, because if the unit economics are working at a 3-to-1 ratio, the sheer volume of the scale will eventually cover the fixed operational costs. That is the entire premise of the modern growth mindset. You front-load the acquisition cost to dominate the sector.
It did not take care of itself.
Yeah.
Listen to the fundamental flaw in the golden ratio. Customer lifetime value is a projection. It is an actuarial guess based on historical cohort data. Customer acquisition cost is cash out the door today.
But the data supports the projection.
You are paying the advertising networks in hard currency today for revenue you hope to collect over the next 20 months.
But if your historical churn rate is stable, the projection is mathematically sound. You are just utilizing a financing gap to acquire the user.
But you cannot pay your engineers with a projected lifetime value. Let's break down the actual math, because this is where the money printing machine metaphor completely falls apart. Let's use your exact numbers. You spend $100 in CAC to acquire a customer. You project a $300 CLV over 2 years. That's a perfect 3-to-1 ratio. The marketing team is popping champagne.
Right, because the return on ad spend is fantastic.
But look at the operations. Let's say your gross profit margin, the actual cost to deliver the product, the server hosting, the raw materials, is 50%. So over those 2 years, it costs you $150 just to fulfill the product for that customer. Subtract your $100 acquisition costs, you are now left with $50 in gross profit spread over 2 years.
Okay, $50 in gross profit per user. At scale, with 100,000 users, that's $5 million.
Yes, but we haven't touched net profit margin. You still have to pay the rent for the office. You have to pay the legal team. You have to pay the insurance premiums. You have to pay the massive salaries of the customer support and engineering teams. Let's say your operational overhead, when divided by your total customer base, allocates out to $100 per customer.
Wait.
Do the math. You spent $100 to acquire them. You spent $150 to deliver the product. You spent $100 in operational overhead. That is $350 in total real-world costs for $300 in projected revenue. You are losing $50 on every single customer you acquire,
Yeah.
and your instinct was to take out loans to scale that.
Wow.
You aren't scaling a business. You are scaling a structural deficit.
I see what you're saying. The 3-to-1 ratio only looks at the efficiency of the marketing department, but it treats the rest of the company as if it operates for free.
Exactly. This was the exact delusion of companies like WeWork.
Oh, man. WeWork.
Right. They had incredible top-line growth. They acquired members at a staggering rate. The marketing looked phenomenal. But the massive, crippling operational overhead of the long-term commercial leases meant their net profit margin was catastrophically negative. Uber did the exact same thing for a decade, subsidizing the cost of the rides to acquire the market share, praying that the lifetime value would eventually outpace the massive operational burn rate.
So you're saying that the marketing view is inherently optimistic. It assumes future behavior will validate present spending. But the financial view, looking at the net profit margin, is inherently realistic.
Yeah.
It only cares about the cash actually sitting in the bank after payroll clears. And if the marketing team is running the company without cross-referencing the financial dashboard, you are driving the car blindfolded.
You are driving it blindfolded straight toward an insolvency event. I'm not saying the golden ratio is a useless metric. It is an incredibly valuable diagnostic tool for the efficiency of your acquisition channels. You should track it. But it is not the ultimate measure of sustainability.
Okay, so if we have to reconcile these two opposing forces, the aggressive VC-backed growth engine of the marketing team and the ruthless pragmatic discipline of the finance team, what does the synthesis look like? Because a business that only listens to finance never takes the necessary risks to grow, and a business that only listens to marketing burns all its cash and implodes.
The synthesis is that true sustainability requires an integrated dashboard. You absolutely must optimize your acquisition channels to approach that 3-to-1 ratio, ensuring you aren't overpaying for attention.
But, and this is the non-negotiable caveat, you must maintain a positive or at least a highly controlled and documented net profit margin as you scale. You have to prove that the underlying unit economics of the entire company, including overhead, are viable.
It's about sequential validation.
Yeah.
You use the marketing metrics to validate the demand, but you use the financial metrics to validate the business model.
Yes, exactly.
Let's take a breath, because that distinction right there, the difference between a profitable product and a profitable company, is the exact reality check that saves founders from bankruptcy. It really is.
But let's dial the intensity back just a bit. We've navigated the top of the funnel. We've debated the intense financial realities of scaling and unit economics. Let's look at the daily, practical reality of actually retaining those customers you just spend so much capital to acquire. Let's talk about the pulse of the customer.
Which brings us to communication metrics. Because once a user crosses that final toll booth and becomes a paying customer, how you communicate with them dictates their retention rate. And as we just established with the CLV math, retention is the foundation of your revenue projections.
And the most universal channel for customer communication at scale is email. But there is a massive misunderstanding about how to read email telemetry. Founders constantly conflate two distinct metrics, email open rate and email click-through rate. For anyone listening, you have to separate these in your mind.
They are very different.
Your email open rate does not measure the quality of your newsletter. It does not measure the value of your insights. It strictly measures the psychological effectiveness of your subject line and the timing of the delivery. It is just the percentage of people who saw your brand name in an inbox crowded with hundreds of other promotional emails and felt curious enough to click.
It is the digital equivalent of getting someone to open a piece of direct mail instead of throwing it straight into the recycling bin. You could write the most brilliant industry-defining essay inside the email, but if the subject line is Q3 Newsletter Volume 4, the open rate will be abysmal. The content is never seen.
No one is clicking that.
Conversely, you could use a highly sensationalized clickbait subject line that generates an 80% open rate, but if the content inside is irrelevant or poorly written, the user will feel manipulated.
Which is exactly why the email click-through rate is the true measure of resonance. The open rate measures curiosity, the click-through rate measures authority. Did the content inside the email actually convince the reader to take an action? Did they click the link to read the full article or download the update or view the new product?
And this framework applies perfectly to social engagement metrics as well, likes, shares, comments. A lot of seasoned financial analysts dismiss social measures as the ultimate vanity metrics. They argue that a like on a platform doesn't pay the rent.
I used to be one of those people. I thought tracking likes was just feeding the ego of the social media manager.
They are vanity metrics if you use them to justify your financial health to an investor. But they are highly valuable metrics if you understand their structural role in algorithmic distribution. A like is a passive endorsement, telling the platform's algorithm that your content is holding attention. A share is an active endorsement. A user is willing to leverage their own personal network to distribute your brand. And a comment is active participation.
It's training the algorithm.
Exactly. These metrics are the signals that train the algorithmic gatekeepers. High engagement mathematically forces the platform to serve your content to a broader audience, which directly fuels the top of your funnel, driving more organic traffic back to your site.
It's a closed loop. The social engagement drives the impressions drive the traffic enters the funnel creates the customer, and the customer generates the LTV. Every single metric we've discussed today is connected.
Which brings us to the ultimate operational philosophy of this entire deep dive. Data is utterly, completely useless if it does not dictate action.
Yes.
Collecting data just to hoard it in a dashboard is corporate theater. The entire purpose of building this telemetry system is to actually grab the controls and change the trajectory of the business when the alarms go off.
We have to move from guessing to growing. And to do that, we need to lay out a highly specific, actionable schedule. If you are running a business right now, what does your Friday afternoon look like? Are you exhausted, scrolling through your inbox, relying purely on intuition to guess whether it was a good week? Or do you have a structured audit?
The most effective founders separate the tactical from the strategic. You need two different rhythms for your data review.
Break that down for us. What is the weekly rhythm?
On a weekly basis, perhaps that Friday afternoon, you conduct a tactical audit. You are looking exclusively at your leading indicators. You open Google Analytics and review the traffic volume and the bounce rate. You open your email platform and look at the open rates and CTR of that week's campaigns. You check the social engagement. These metrics change rapidly, and they require immediate tactical adjustments.
Give me an example of an adjustment.
So if you see a specific blog post spiking in organic traffic unexpectedly, your tactical move is to immediately optimize the call to action on that specific page to capture that unexpected attention.
It's a quick pulse check. It takes maybe 20 minutes, but it ensures you aren't bleeding traffic unnecessarily. But we shouldn't be looking at the heavy financial metrics every Friday, right?
No, because financial metrics are lagging indicators. If you check your net profit margin or your customer acquisition cost every single Friday, the micro fluctuations will drive you into a state of constant anxiety.
You'd go crazy.
You really would. Those require a monthly strategic review. Once a month, you sit down with your CRM and your accounting software. You calculate your monthly recurring revenue. You run the hard math on your SIC for the trailing 30 days. You evaluate your gross and net profit margins. You look at the business not as a marketer, but as an auditor.
It's the difference between checking the weather outside, which you do daily so you know whether to grab an umbrella, and reviewing your home's structural foundation, which you do on a much broader, intentional schedule. You need to do both, but mixing up the intervals leads to either getting rained on or constantly tearing up your floorboards.
That is a perfect analogy. By establishing this dual cadence habit, the weekly tactical adjustment and the monthly strategic audit, you remove emotional volatility from your decision-making. You stop running your business based on panic or ego, and you start running it based on objective reality.
And that is how you build a playbook that actually works. You stop guessing what the market wants, you start tracking how they actually behave, and you use that reality to grow.
But before we wrap up this analysis, this raises an important question, and it's one that I want you to really mull over as you build your own data habit this week.
Lay it on us.
We have spent this entire deep dive worshiping at the altar of analytics. We have preached the gospel of the dashboard. But it is vital to remember the absolute limit of data. Telemetry only tells you what is happening. It tells you what the conversion rate is. It tells you what the margin is.
Right, it gives you the coordinates.
But as a founder, as the human being actually leading the enterprise, your empathy and your intuition are the only tools that can figure out why. Consider this scenario. What if your dashboard shows a perfectly optimized 3-to-1 CLV to CAC ratio? Your churn is incredibly low. The spreadsheet says you are a genius.
The dream state.
But what if your customers are staying with you not because they love your product, but because your software is so deeply entrenched in their systems that it is technically terrifying for them to uninstall it? What if your retention is built entirely on friction rather than loyalty?
Wow, the data will tell you that you are succeeding. The dashboard will be glowing green.
But if you actually talk to them, your intuition will tell you that they actively resent your brand. You are building a highly profitable house of cards. And the second a competitor enters the market with a tool that is easier to use and offers a seamless migration path, your perfectly optimized data will collapse overnight.
Data is the telemetry, but you still have to look out the windshield. You have to pick up the phone. You have to talk to the human beings who are paying your payroll. You have to maintain that qualitative feedback loop to give the quantitative data its actual meaning.
Never let the dashboard replace your empathy.
What an incredible place to leave it. We've navigated the overwhelming mechanics of traffic, the psychology of the funnel, the brutal realities of operational margins, and hopefully given you the exact framework you need to build a truly profitable, sustainable business. If you want to read more, check out our blog at intothemargins.com/playbook.
It's been a great deep dive.
Thank you for diving into the margins with us today. Build your dashboards, check your numbers, and we will see you next time.